Okay, hey guys, I'll wait a few seconds and just confirm that the stream is working. There is always a significant delay, looking at about 8 or 9 seconds. So if I don't pop on and answer what you're saying, then just give it a few seconds and I will address them. If you hear noises, my lovely assistants, my Degus, Digit, and Gizmo always love being the loudest when people are here, which is hilarious. We gotta get a wheel that doesn't make as much noise. It's kind of got a very weak base, so it wobbles a lot. Okay, so the first part of this is we're gonna go through a quick refresher. I'm gonna try to keep these slim. Now that if you look in the description of the video, you will find the content for the OGL. You can actually see the file. It's on Google Drive. It's the current build. It's obviously incomplete because we're all just getting together and working on this together. And I'm going to go through it real quick. Once again, if you have any questions, let me know. I'm just going to get a few more announcements out, and then we will begin. My Degus. So we'll do that. I also want to add, once again, thanks for all the positive comments regarding my autism diagnosis. It's thank you. Yes, it's been an interesting process, and the person that's going to be probably the most to kind of make a lot of changes is going to be me and my wife, most likely. So we're going to get into this. Anyone who wants to comment, please do. If you are, if you want to add your name to a contributor, all you need to do is email me your name at dsxmachina@gmail.com. If you want it to be a handle, you can make it a handle. If you want to make it, if you want to change them, you can give it to me however you'd like, and I will add it in. So we got our disclaimer, we got our die steps. I've added a new rule here, which we'll explain here in a second. This is applying to, like I said, natural talent is a new thing. And this natural talent is basically defining one of our big rules that we added here. Namely, this little thing, your dexterity score is also your natural talent. So before it said your dexterity ability score is also your is an unmodified number. Am I stuck? Seems like I'm stuck. I can easily see myself in OBS, but looking at oh no, it's back. Okay, we're good. Just occasionally kind of messes up. Okay, so this was one of the rules, and here, unlike other games, all players gain training automatically in certain skills, such as acrobatics, athletics. These are specialty skills. Your ability score is your minimum roll when making a check with a specialty skill tied to that ability score, instead of rolling for check. Okay, this is called natural talent. So the idea is that instead of repeating the same process here and here, I gave it a name, natural talent. And you'll also see me say the word specialty. Specialty skills are these skills that are specifically tied to your natural talent. You can get these skills separately, potentially. But going over it again, strength is always athletics, dexterity is always acrobatic, constitution is always vitality. So the physical skills have one skill attached to them only. When we get here, by the way, if this is too small, let me know and I will zoom it up so you can see more. I just wanted to get a 2-page spread so people can see more of the file that we're working on here. Also, say hi in the comments. If you have any questions as well, feel free to drop them in. And so for intelligence, wisdom, and charisma, though, players have a choice. With intelligence, your natural talent can be any one intelligence-based skill. Wisdom, you choose between insight and perception. That's a new change. We changed it from insight and perception. And then here, charisma, it's any charisma skill. So when you create your character, you choose one of these skills. And this is me doing the Wheel of Fortune. Hey, Frederick, from How to RPG. How you doing? I try to catch your streams whenever I can. Everyone here, if you haven't subscribed to How to RPG, do so right now. Jump off, subscribe, and then come back. So we've added an insight or perception. So there's a choice for all these mental skills, and that's the big thing. So I was mentioning this is the Wheel of Fortune idea. And the Wheel of Fortune idea, of course, is that in the final round of Wheel of Fortune, everyone did their research, and they knew statistically that you always picked RSTLN, and the value you always picked was E. And it became so ubiquitous that eventually, after years of this, they just gave those letters to people automatically, and then they had to pick 3 more constants at a vowel. That was their big change. The only issue, of course, is that those 3 also became very common, and so they always picked the same one and one vowel, and the vowel was always a name. So this is our situation where we're giving people 6 skills that they're trained in, that they're proficient in automatically, and this is associated with your natural talent. You get some choice on which those skills are for your mental, but for your physical, they're all the same. And this is basically giving people all these skills ahead of time, so that when you get to your classroom background, you might not necessarily get as many skills as you would normally. And the idea being here is that we're putting a lot of onus or kind of the idea of customization really early in the process. We do that with ability scores as well. And we've also seen here that your constitution now also dictates your hit die. It can be modified with your class, but it basically states it. And your base speed can be strength or dex based, and you have these. There's a part of me that's thinking of dropping the strength, but maybe we'll keep it strength or dex based, and that gives you your starting movement, which can also be modified, usually by species. And that's the other big thing where your class doesn't really dictate these values. The XP, feats, and paragon paths. This is basically almost a duplicate of what we're used to seeing in most 5e publications. The only thing, we're just putting this here just to verify to people. You'll also notice that we're going to 30 levels. That's half true. Classes will go to 20. So if you want to run a traditional 20-level games, you can. But then there are these the epic destinies, which, if you want to continue past that, are a completely separate path. And then the paragon class, you select during, and like I said, in with the new version of D&D, and with what I've been doing for the last 6 years with Ultramodern, there are universal paragon classes, and they always get them at the same level. So I know that when D&D has been offering that, Ultramodern has been offering that since 2016. So it's not something we're taking from them. So that's there. So this new file also is going to have. You are so loud. We've got just details. I basically just gave explanations of these things, and I've also kind of played around and added the trained only. This is something that 5th edition took out, the fact that there are certain skills you cannot use unless you have training in them. You have to be proficient, and for these specifically, there are going to be int-based skills, namely Arcana, Engineering, Medicine, Sciences, Linguistics, Husbandry for Wisdom, and Performance under Charisma. So those are the only ones that have that. If you have any objections or any ideas, just drop them in. So when we're looking here, we have played around with a few names, but basically Strength, you have Athletics, that doesn't change. Dexterity, we've renamed Sleight of Hand Trickery, and we have Stealth and Acrobatics. Once again, Athletics and Acrobatics are both specialty skills that are part of natural talent. We've added Trickery and Intelligence. Obviously, I've brought the sci-fi skills from Ultramodern over, which is the reason why we have Engineering and Sciences. This is going to be the question I'm going to address the group right now. Do we put in a pilot or driver skill? Now, someone asked in a previous stream about tool proficiencies, and I stated that I really, really, really hated tool proficiency. I did not like it. If it was undefined, there wasn't even technically an ability modifier attached to them, which is something that was weird. And also, it kind of said the fact that you couldn't do something unless you had this toolkit. But what about improvising a toolkit? What about trying to do things off on the side? And there's also a ton of, it was just something that was very rubbery. And the fact that they have to make toolkits for basically every application. Cobblers, carpentries, cartography tours. And so you were like proficient with all these tools. I mean, I can see because it gives you a lot of variety. We can like, you can say, because obviously we have engineering is our physical construction skill, which we use for crafting. And the reason why we did that is because there were too many other kits, and I didn't want to create like, oh, you're proficient with a tool kit, an electronics kit, and so forth. And it felt weird that your brain and your skills were intrinsically tied to an item. This is not like the sonic screwdriver. So this is one of the things I'm leaving up to people if they think we should keep tool proficiencies back in. It's tough. I mean, I can see the appeal because you have a long list. If I do that, though, I'm probably going to mention the skill in which they're the attribute there or skill that they're attached to. Yeah, because it says like proficiency with these tools lets you add your proficiency bonus to any ability checks you make to disarm traps or open locks. It doesn't really mention, because that I would suggest piloted drive being an optional variant for settings that need it. I would probably throw it in there anyway. Basically, a vehicle operation, which I know has been a term used. And then pilot drive falls into that category. But going that direction, meaning we're going to kind of eliminate these ideas of tool proficiency. There's still going to be tools, and you can easily say you need a tool in order to do a task. But for example, like the musical instrument, for example, says if you have proficiency with a given musical instrument, you can add your proficiency bonus to ability checks you make with a play music with that instrument. But it never states what the attribute is. You kind of have to, you have to kind of assume. And this is something that's always annoyed me about tools. So I can see putting tools back in on the condition that we tie them to a specific thing. Because right now, like I said, we have performance, and we say it's a trained thing. And performance is assumed to be what you would do for musical instruments. Hi, Endless Science. I'm doing we've kind of gone through most of the recap. We're just finishing up here what we're talking about regarding skill checks and so forth. We basically outlined all of this, which we'll go into. But the question I'm presenting to the group as it starts to populate here is whether or not we are going to put tool proficiencies. I know we talked about it last time, and I kind of stated I disliked them. And the reason why I wanted to define it, I disliked them, was because there was no ability score attached to them by definition. If you go through the tool proficiencies, it says you can add your proficiency bonus to these tasks, but it doesn't actually tell you what the ability score is. I mean, yeah, you assume that your musical instrument will be charisma, right? The same basically as performance, but it doesn't actually, it doesn't explicitly state that. The reason why this looks a bit better is because that you can now, if you look in the description of the video, you can find the link to download this. It's everything up to basically these notes here at the bottom. So that's the question I'm going to leave to you, and we're going to move on, and we're going to return to this, and that'll dictate whether or not we do a little bit of rewording to these, and because basically tools are just another skill, and ultimately that's what they are. They're a very specialized skill because you get to use one specific item. And we decided that engineering was going to be something that was going to be divorced from this. And in many ways, when we really look at it, they have medicine, and yet when you look at there's no is there a medical kit? There's a poisoner's kit. But wouldn't that also just involve medicine? What a tuba. Yeah, I think it's a tuba. Yeah, exactly. Strong diaphragm. I mean, it's one of those situations where that's exactly the point. Like it could be something else. And I know that's probably the reason why they didn't define it, but in certain situations it seems like it should have a definition, right? It's like you're assuming if you're proficient with a gaming set that you would use dexterity for all of those, but theoretically, potentially, maybe it's intelligence, right? So it's one of those situations where I can see throwing in this tool proficiency system on the condition that it mentions a couple abilities potentially. I could say musical instrument. It could be, I can't think of a musical instrument. Well, if you really think about it, I can think of a musical instrument. If you're going to include tool proficiencies, I think that guidance around the ability score to use is needed. Like I said, that's exactly my issue. So I think we'll hold off by adding pilot. And the funny thing is that, once again, like we have sleight of hand, and then we have like navigator's tools. It's like navigator's tools, but once again, like you seem like you need to have a navigation set in order to navigate, and yet we have situations where we have things like in wisdom, we have survival, which involves tracking prey and so forth, but apparently it doesn't have any form of outside navigation, and so some of these are just a little on the confusing side. So I can see adding some of these and not adding others, right? Like a disguise kit. A disguise kit is like you can make a really good disguise, but isn't that? And then when you're in that disguise and you're, say, infiltrating a ball, for example, are you rolling your disguise tool proficiency, or are you rolling deception, or are you doing performance or persuasion? It comes to this kind of vagueness that's always kind of had an issue. And that's where I think when we get to equipment and we define tools, which tools are we going to bother trying to enter? I mean, forgery kit, disguise kit, I maybe on that condition where performance is you trying to act like someone else, and disguise kit literally makes you look like somebody else. And the same thing with sleight of hand and thieves tools. Sleight of hand, of course, is palming and stuff like that. And then you need the thieves tools. I mean, I can see the appeal, but I think How to RPG is absolutely correct. We absolutely should define what ability scores and define these a bit more. And as a result, although we'll probably add more technology-based tools here, we will likely not have as many toolkits as before. So we might actually add them into this section, just because it would be technically part of a skill set. So we'll leave that for now, and we've been playing around. This is something, a very minor thing I kind of added in. So if we look here, we can see that with skill checks, unless you possess a feature that allows you to employ it, you gain no benefit from rolling a natural 20 with a skill check. With skill checks, if you are trained with a skill you're employing, you do not automatically fail if rolling a natural 1. This is a very minor thing. I just threw it in as a passing thing that if you're trained in a skill, a natural 1 is never an automatic failure. That being said, it probably isn't a particularly good roll. But if you have enough ranks and the DC is 10, and you can make that roll with a 1, you can create a situation where you can't really fail those skills checks. So this is a minor one. That being said, I don't like the idea of a trained skill giving a natural 20, because I was talking in several groups with people that have set impossibly high DCs to discourage people from doing exactly that. So we make sure that we've defined that you can't roll a natural 20 with a skill, and you can roll a natural 1 if you're untrained. And other thing we talked about the skill DCs, now it's a range rather than fixed. So very easy 5 to 9, easy 10 to 14. So basically we just changed this a little bit, and that's basically so that natural talent is useful. And I've even said the fact that while a GM may know what ability score players possess, they should not automatically set skill DCs outside of one's natural talent. This is something we particularly saying, the fact that we know GM's going to be like, what's your natural talent? 14. Okay, so the DC is 15, so you have to roll. And that's unfair, and it's a cheesy thing for a GM to do. So we're just stating that they should not be doing that. Contested skill checks, we talked about briefly about whether or not people can use their natural talent for contested skill checks. We didn't really get a firm answer last time, so I'm stating that you can if you want, but you run the risk that it gets in such situations where you can say, I'm setting my roll to 15, and you don't know if the other guy is rolling or not, so he may automatically have a natural talent above yours, or he might roll. So you'd be surprised the number of times somebody might go, you know what, I'm going to run the chance, because this guy's rolling, and I have a DC 15, which is usually really good, but in a contested check, I'm going to have to roll. So we kind of create a situation where somebody may go, you know what, I'm going to use the fixed number. So at this point, we're allowing people to use natural talent with contested skill checks. And then we're talking about bonuses. Now, saving throws, as I was mentioning in a chat just recently, is that this is the only thing you need to modify currently for 5e. And that is anytime you're doing a strength or a constitution saving throw, you're just doing a fortitude saving throw, because a fortitude is a single saving throw that uses either of those attributes. Likewise, if you have to make an int save or a dex save, you're making a ref save, and consequently, wisdom and charisma become will. And that's why we're just reducing the 6 saving throws to just 3. One of the issues with tools in 5e is that many people don't know how to address it, so it never got used outside of these tools, which is why Xanathar's was published. I made a point of not reading Xanathar's just because once again, whenever I have a standard policy, I don't read any outside of the 3 main books. I don't read any other supplements, because I don't want to be accused of taking ideas from them. And the irony is that the opposite has happened, because people said the life path system that's in ultra modern is heavily replicated in Xanathar. That's what I've been told. And then of course I keep on telling, well, they'll just say that they ripped it off of Artel Zorian Cyberpunk system, which is what I did. Actually, it's not Cyberpunk. I think I used Mecton Zeta. But anyway, those are the 3 saving throws. And we also talked about languages. And we had an interesting conversation where people were trying to convince me that most people speak multiple languages. And I was trying to make a comment the fact that currently the only reason why there's so many people who are bilingual is because we have a global society, and in a lot of areas people weren't bilingual. And that was basically me making a point of giving people a lot of additional languages because players were so exceptional. So this is something else. Like there's a lot of automatic givens that we're doing with this system. We're automatically giving people trained skills, and the other thing, we're automatically giving them languages. Every single character, hey Aaron, every single character always knows what I call the lingua franca of the setting. It could be common, allspeak, or English. You then gain an additional language with your species selection, maybe. And then character creation, you gain an additional number of languages equal to your intelligence ability score modifier. You may end up getting more depending, like if your background is a professional linguist, then you might be able to get a few more, but that's something we're doing. So like I said, we're taking a lot of the teeth out of like so that your class isn't like the only thing defines you. What you are at the beginning, like when you're born, you have some natural things, and this is what we were talking about nurture versus nature. And when we get to species, we'll get into that as well. And we also talked about modifiers. Primarily, we mentioned cumulative, and unlike 5e, we're kind of copying something from the older editions in the fact we are naming their bonuses. Expertise, which we know is your proficiency bonus, ability, enhancement, and untyped. Pretty straightforward definition. And then we've added naming modifiers. Something that 4th edition did, that they had a fixed +2 definition, and we're doing that as well. D&D 5e really doesn't like adding static modifiers. They like adding advantage, but I want to create some variety. So anytime you give someone an edge, you're giving them a +2. If someone's superior or inferior, they get a +5. These can be static defense, like you can just get, like, for example, a rogue might have an edge with acrobat checks, for example. And that's a permanent +2 bonus. But if someone else gives that person an edge, that person's like, I already have an edge. You can't give me more of an edge. But if someone's superior, then they get a +5. If they're inferior, they suffer a -5. And hampered is the opposite of edge. I was trying to figure out what this word was. I kept on resorting to handicap, and I know handicap is probably not an appropriate word. So hampered is the word I use for the -2 penalties. And then we have other benefits. And we talked about advantage, disadvantage. And we've added the possibility of double advantage. Oh, I don't want to do that. Go away. Stupid. Giving people a double advantage or double disadvantage. And somebody threw this out as a suggestion, and no suggestions are ignored. Being awesome. If you're awesome, you can set your next D20 to an unnatural 20. So that's it, and we could easily get that removed, or we have a better name, which I hope so. But those are our benefits, which moves us to today when we're talking about combat. I'm going to move this somewhere else, just we're not talking about it right now. So we're talking about combat today. And I swear to God, I'll make these summaries a lot faster. Now that the file is downloadable, definitely download those from now on. Every time we post a new stream scheduled, you will see the file there, and you'll see any updates that we do. So moving on to combat. So anyone here, we're talking about combat now. And we are looking at, basically, we're at order of combat initially, right? And I think the first thing we need to look at is automatically is surprise, which has always been a bit of an issue. Remember, okay, so it's basically if you're surprised. So the idea is that a surprised is a condition, which I don't have a problem. And once we get to conditions, which we'll probably talk about today, because conditions are part of combat. If you're surprised, you can't take any actions or reactions. Basically, it means somebody else gets a full action. For the first turn of combat, you can't take a reaction until that turn ends. A member of a group can be surprised even if other members are. That's pretty straightforward. There's nothing really going to happen. And that being said, it also depends if we want to make surprise a bit more teethy. So it's one thing to consider if not surprise, for example, gives everyone an edge, for example. So it gives attacking side an edge. So something to consider if we want to add a bit more teeth. Some people have had issues with surprise, that it doesn't have a lot of teeth. That you get it, like you get a surprise, and then every single player with who is surprising the enemy, all of them miss, and so the entire surprise goes completely. It kind of whiffs out, and you would think that a surprise would be a much more destructive. So either gives an edge or something more severe. Something to consider as we move on. Obviously, once again, we have oops, sorry. Established positions, which is basically obvious. Rolling initiative. I don't think anything's going to change in these ones when it comes to initiative. Because rolling initiative has just been around since the beginning of time, so I can't in any way see that being an issue. And then comes the big ones, types of actions. Now, 5e has always been very vague in this, in the fact that you get an action, and then you can move. And then you get potentially a bonus action if that bonus action is something you have access to. And then you have free things. That's why I'm calling them free things. And the reason why is that they create a situation where they just say, this doesn't take an action. And I was corrected by certain people where I was saying, this takes a free action. And people said there's no such thing as free actions in 5e. And I got a little frustrated. So I literally had to add the rule in going, no, free action is something we're defining. A free action is something you do that doesn't take up any movement and doesn't take up your action. So the trick here now I don't want to pull from the Pathfinder 3.5. We want to kind of keep this normal, right? So I don't know if I want to necessarily add the standard action, move action. But that being said, I am very tempted of doing it like this, right? Now, it's interesting that there is an action and a bonus action. It makes sense that the standard action is the action everyone gets and so forth. And 4th edition had this, this was called minor action, by the way. But we're going to keep calling it bonus action to kind of pertain to 5e. And then we're defining the free action. The question, of course, is whether or not we do this. Now, for those people who don't know, move action has kind of been defined for every version of D&D that most people know about. We're talking about that 3.5 all the way to 3.75 and 4th edition both had move actions. And the idea was that every action could be swapped downward, meaning you could change a standard action to a move and a move to a minor action or a swift action if we're looking at Pathfinder. But you couldn't go the other way around. You couldn't turn a move to a standard. And that's basically how the definition worked. However, there were a bunch of extra rules in that people had to consider. One of that is the fact that you couldn't break up an action by definition. You could move your bonus action to be at any point. You can do these actions in any order you wanted, but you couldn't break up an action, and that's what 5e did. Now, for those people who don't know, there was a type of feat and a type of ability, and I am trying to remember what the name was. Somebody will probably tell me. It's a feat that goes back to the original editions, and I probably don't need to go into explanation of what this is. Was it Fleet of Foot? That was the ability that basically allows you to break up your movement. You actually had to have that ability, otherwise you couldn't. Which means once you were done attacking, and if there was no enemy there, you couldn't do movement if you had already moved there. You couldn't just, I moved 10 feet this direction. I can see the appeal, and one of the reasons why I did that was when we got to Ultramodern 5 from Ultramodern 4, I said that you can use some of your movement, using 30 feet of movement to do this. And I started to really like that because it allowed us to play with things where suddenly something that cost 30 feet of movement then cost 20 feet of movement. And if you had a higher movement, you could potentially have movement just crippled rather than you being forced to stay still. So I can see the reason for dropping move because of the Fleet of Foot and because people will assume that they can't break up their move action, right? So I can see that. I think if you were to ask me this a couple days or a couple weeks ago or even a couple years ago, I would have said drop movement, put move action back in, but that then kind of forces us to play with Fleet of Foot. And the reason why 5e got rid of that is because it was kind of annoying giving people that hindrance. So I can see that, but that being said, I do want to define the free action. And at that point, it defines whether or not we should bother with calling a standard action an action or just calling it the action, movement, bonus action, and free action, and just going on from there. So how to RPG. The thing with having surprise is getting to act the first round often included advantage on the first attack as they are often unseen. Yeah. The issue, of course, is that when you look at the surprise section, it doesn't specifically say that. So, I mean, it's going to be either an edge or advantage, and that's what I'm going to leave up to the group, whether or not we should do that. Because I basically want to give, regardless, if someone is surprised, it's going to be a bit more severe. Attacks against you have advantage if you're surprised. This goes back to the old dex-based rules where you were flat-footed, and if you didn't, there were like 3 different ACs back in the day. You had your regular AC, an armor-based AC, and then an AC if you couldn't move. And sometimes it was exactly the same as your AC because you were not a maneuverable person. But if you were a maneuverable person, you had a lower AC if you were flat-footed. Now, this was kind of annoying because it put the advantage on people who were just naturally armored. And so there was a reason why this was outright removed. So giving people advantage or an edge, I think, is probably a good thing to go with this. I just want surprise to have a more defined benefit. And so I think, unless people have any other objections, we'll leave we won't do the move action, only because we're keeping the ability of allowing people to break up their move, moving between attacks or using different speeds. And giving people that option, giving people that freedom of movement, which 3.5 and even 4th edition didn't really do. So yeah, I can see we'll leave that for now unless there's any objection. Then we have the reaction. Now, for people who don't know, the old version had interrupts. There were 2 types of actions outside of your turn. You either had the immediate interrupt or the immediate reaction. An immediate interrupt allowed you to counter the action, so you could stop it from happening. And the immediate reaction is you couldn't interrupt the action. You couldn't stop the action. It was coming down if you liked it or not. I'm not the hugest fan of the word bonus, since it implies that it should be something that is extra and not something that you should always be having access to. that's a yeah. The whole idea for people who don't, bonus action is something you can do only if you have something that gives you a bonus action. Like if you have an ability that says you can use a bonus action to do this, then you can do that. But if you don't have it, then you don't have the capacity. I mean, and that's basically the reason why they called it a bonus action. And the only other thing I can think of is playing with the wording by saying going back to calling it a minor action. But then it assumes that if you don't have something that's defined as a bonus action, you can still do it as a bonus action, which is not a bad idea to really think about it. The fact that, like I say, because if I remember correctly, the idea of the bonus action is the fact that there was no bonus action that everyone got. That doesn't mean having surprised always included being hidden. I generally find the battles last only 1 to 3 rounds. That is true. Combat can run a lot faster, unlike 4th edition where combat can take a lot longer. 5th edition battles can be very, very quick, almost as quick as 3.5 battles. I've seen high-level 3.5 encounters take 2 rounds. There was one situation where players were fighting a beholder. The players got initiative over it, and they managed to kill it before the beholder and that's because they cooked off everything, because they knew the moment the beholder acted, one of them was probably going to die. So they needed to take it down as quickly as humanly possible. So they cooked off everything. They just went alpha striked on this thing in order to kill it. So yeah, I have seen battles take 1 to 3 rounds. That being said, I'm not sure about the length of combat affecting surprise. I mean, I think if you're surprised, people should have advantage or an edge. I mean, if you're hidden, please change the bonus action name to avoid confusion. Great. Do you want to just call it as a bonus? So we have action, movement, and bonus, or do we want to remove the part? Like, I don't know what the part is confusing. Is it because the action and then bonus action? You could say there's an action, movement, and a bonus, and just remove the term action. Or we could call it something else, but I don't know if changing this is going to change anything there. But anyway, going back to what we were saying, there was immediate interrupt and immediate reaction. That's what 4E did. And I can't remember what Pathfinder did. I'm pretty sure they also had interrupts and reactions. This was the one big thing where D&D always had reactions. So you can never interrupt what someone else is doing, which is, it's one of those situations, and that's the question. Like, we don't have to go immediate interrupt. We could just call it an interrupt, and we could add the interrupt as a potential. That's one thing to think about, is whether or not we want to add interrupt to the whole thing. And just space there. So that's I'm going to pose that to the group. We'll let you guys think about that. So we've defined that movement. And we've also defined that anything that can affect movement is also occurring with movement. So you don't need to do an action to open a door, don a mask. So it's one of those situations where, once again, the fact that they've put in interaction in your movement. And that's something that was very interesting. And yeah, I've always found that a little weird that they've done that. Right? And basically interacting with objects around you, removing a ring from your finger, and the funny thing is that these are all free actions. And this is one of those things where we got it confused, where they said there's a whole bunch of things that are free actions, but then you can do things as part of your move, like all of these things. And if we define free actions, we create a situation where you can do these things, and it's got a defined location where those can happen. But that being said, if we want to take out the word action, then we can take out free as well. We can just say, and say for free, you can do this. And that being said, I've always had issues. It's one of those situations where I guess the thought is, if we have calling the standard action, bonus action, free action, or action, bonus, free. So that's the other question that we're addressing people here. And nothing much changes on that. And difficult terrain is not going to change. Right, we're not messing around with difficult terrain. However, we might have issues. I want to look at specifically where is the rules for, yeah, there, opportunity attacks are on page 195. We'll get to that. Since just about everyone has something that grants them a bonus action, I feel that the name just kind of loses meaning. I think minor is fine, but also swift, quick, or simple. That being said, I think what How to RPG was talking about was in reference to using the word action more than once in this line. So basically, we have two ideas here. We have action, movement, bonus, free reaction, or we have standard action, movement, bonus action, free action. Oops, sorry, not standard. I copied the wrong thing. And free action. And so those are the two, and I know D&D 5e wanted to simplify it, which is the reason why we got to this. This is a separate topic, which we'll have to get into. But that's kind of the two ideas we have. You can see the idea, if we're going to add changing this to a minor action, right? And just calling it a minor action. Standard, minor, free, and reaction, and we can still keep movement as movement without creating a term where we call it an action. How to RPG. Action, bonus, move, free is much better than action, bonus, action, move, action, interaction, and reaction. Well, interaction isn't actually defined. I mean, interacting interact is not an action. Interact is part of movement. But I think we'll fall it into that free area there. So we have a vote for our from How to RPG to use this arrangement, and so we'll kind of leave it at that. So I think I'm kind of, once again, easy, making people easy. So I think we have 2 votes for that, and I don't know whether or not Endless is voting for this arrangement. And so anyone else wants to voice in, go ahead and throw your ideas in here. The other thing, of course, we're just going to keep the breaking up your movement, because that's the whole idea of not turning this into a move action. Creature size is not going to change. Flying movement is not going to change. Squeezing isn't going to change. So basically, half movement will occur in difficult terrain if squeezing. I can't remember if climbing is half movement as well. Hey, Rye, how you guys doing? Come and join in. We just did a recap, and now we're just doing combat. You can see the questions here. One of them is right here, whether or not we want to vote for this arrangement of actions or this arrangement of actions. I got 2 votes for that one for the other one, at least I think so. And I can't remember, and this shows you my blankness, of whether or not climb had defined half your movement, the same as squeezing or difficult terrain. I'm pretty sure it did. It's under movement, of course. I imagine it must be. And 182, so I'm close to that anyway. So climbing, yeah, climbing, swimming are all basically, so squeezing, climbing, and swimming are all half movement unless stated otherwise. Thank you, Endless Knight. Half move. So we're going to make that rule for half of. So I've also mentioned a few of the people who are joining in. We have whether or not we're going to put in interrupt, as well as, or just keep the reaction as being the only thing you can do outside of your turn. I guess it's one of those situations where whether or not we want to play with reaction in such a way where it can potentially interrupt, or like you can have one because the thing is that I guess the rule, I think 4th edition, is that you can get immediate reaction or immediate interrupt, but you can only get one of those. So we could find a way of playing around with the reaction to ensure that there's reaction, but it could be after or before, right? It's one of those situations where you can say you can have reaction and then have it defined by a reflex or an interrupt. right? And a reflex happens before the action that triggers it, and an interrupt happens before and a reflex occurs after. That's one thing to consider for the reaction. I'll put that up there as well because it'll be defining in both areas. Anything outside of walking is half your movement. Yeah. I like reaction potentially interrupts, but they confuse many players. So yeah, this might fix that issue if you have there's a reaction is automatically going to be a reflex action unless it says interrupt, or we can say reflex or interrupt action and so forth. Yeah, so half movement, basically anything that's not walking is half movement. Even though last time I checked, climbing was always a lot slower than swimming, but maybe that was because I was never a very good climber. But in my opinion, I could easily, it depends on what you define as difficult terrain, but whatever. The other thing, so we have that definition. That's not going to change things. Then we have the ready. Yeah. So there's also technically we forgot the ready. Let's see. Actions in combat is ready. Yeah, these are the different types of actions. To cast a spell, dash, ready. So all that's going to be falling under actions. That's not going to change. Disengage, dash, which is just the movement action. It's one of those situations where, yeah, I can see why they're doing that. I agree that reactions confuse the new players. I've had that at my table. So that's the question, whether or not we want to embrace the idea of creating sub-definitions of reaction. There's either a reflex reaction or an interrupt reaction. Something we should consider. For everyone else, let us know whether or not you want this arrangement or this arrangement once again. We actually have one vote for that. And in case you're wondering, no, you notice that one thing we don't have here is a full round action. Yeah, no, we're not going to do a full round action. I can do plenty in my rules with just these. I don't need to do a full round action, so we won't. I can't see why anybody would want to add in a full round action. So the other thing here, of course, is the lack of modifiers. And in Pacific, we're talking about cover, concealment, and concealment includes, it's both invisibility and being hidden. It's one of those situations there. And any modifiers for range, which we'll talk about here in a second. Now, for all of these, the issue, of course, is that they only have one specific thing, which is hilarious, the fact that cover, because there's different types of cover, they do add bonuses to AC, where almost every other example, it's disadvantage. Right? So I know that unseen, if you target attack can't see, you have disadvantage on the attack roll. This is true whether you're guessing the target's location or you're targeting a creature that can hear but not see. If the target is in the location you target, you automatically miss, but the DM typically just says the attack missed, not whether you guessed the target's location correctly. When a creature can't see, you can create a situation where you make the roll with disadvantage, and the GM may completely ignore it if that person's not in that location. So then we get into this. Now this is something I think How to RPG brought this up last week about the fact that cover and concealment, the idea about cover is that something is blocking your attack, right? And I think the reason why they did that is because they basically made terrain and objects indestructible. They created a situation where concealment is it's kind of it's fog, basically. It creates a situation where an environment, right? Now, what's interesting is they usually say if you're in an area that's a fog, there's spells that deal with that. I don't know if there's any fog that does like conceal movement and whether or not there's definition, but it's always interesting that they've never had a definition for yeah, so they have heavily obscured. That's the terminology. Where in the hell is that? Because that's their wording, right? Is using heavily obscured and so forth. And yet it's not under obscured, so I guess it would be heavily obscured. Heavily obscured 183. So that's all the way in environment. For some friggin' reason, it's not in combat, which is just annoying, but I understand why it would be. So once again, so heavily obscured, you're blinded, bright light, dim light, and darkness. So lightly obscured. So that's basically where they put concealment, is they put that in there, which is a little annoying. So I think, like I said, cover, I guess it depends whether or not we want to play with the same rules, right? Like heavily obscured, you're blinded, and then you suffer from the blinded condition, and we know what that does. We'll be getting into conditions here in a little bit if we have time today. Because, yeah. Attack rolls against creature advantage and the disadvantage. Yeah, nothing changes. Yeah. The issue is that I guess it's something that so I agree as well. Maybe this is the case where it could be renamed to. I assume it says immediate action, not imitate action, and then have the keywords for the triggering text that obliterates when the action happens. I think that maybe need to be reworded. So the idea that, you know, you can say as a reaction, and then in quotations you can say reflex or interrupt, and that works, right? That's one way of doing that. And so it gets with one of those situations where we'll still keep the concealment. You can say light concealment, or we can say lightly obscured. You know, lightly obscured. You know, heavily obscured. And heavily obscured is basically the same as full cover, but they rewrite their rules differently. Like heavily obscured, you're blinded, and full cover, you can't get hit. They're very close to being the same thing. Right, and dim light has no rules attached to it. Like dim light. Oh, it does. It creates a lightly obscured area. So dim light's lightly obscured. So it's one of the situations where, why in the world's in the same section? I mean, technically there's only these two. Lightly and heavily obscured are the only ones that actually have rules. If you're in darkness, then you're heavily obscured. If you're in dim light, you're lightly obscured. Cover and concealment come from real military usage. RPGs showing those wargaming roots. Yeah, and that's why 4th edition had cover and concealment. So cover, once we jump past, get back into combat, has 3 cover, and that's always how it's always been. It's always been half cover, 3/4 cover, and full cover. The only advantage is that cover stops bullets, concealment stops your eyeballs, but not bullets. Very good point. It's a very good point. So it's one of the situations where this will probably not change. The issue, of course, is that lightly obscured and heavily obscured, like light obscured, going back to what we said earlier, you have disadvantage. So the light obscured is you have disadvantage on wisdom perception checks that rely on sight. So it doesn't actually affect combat. And that's the biggest thing about lightly obscured. It doesn't actually affect combat. It just affects perception rules, which may come in combat. And heavily obscured, absolutely, you basically have disadvantage in all your attacks. And so we know that that's disadvantage. And this one just affects perception, but it doesn't actually affect combat, right? Like you can say the fact that you could say that attacks are hampered, which we defined earlier, and the fact that your attacks are a -2. And I think that should make sense, especially in ranged combat. I think that in a lightly obscured area, ranged combat should be more difficult, but according to this, it's not. If you can see a target, you can shoot them in lightly obscured. So I think that should be employed. Heavily obscured can still say a disadvantage. Half cover, of course, we're adding a C. So it's not disadvantage, it's just an AC bonus. But we've defined those what they are. So you get an edge for half cover. Now, that being said, someone who already has an edge, so we can make it an untyped bonus, +5, and then cannot be hit. That also being said, I guess you can't. It's one of those situations where heavy, full cover, or total cover, as they call it, has always been the fact that someone says, I have total cover. The issue is that you use movement to expose yourself from total cover, then you make your attack, and then your movement to go back in. And that's one thing, and that's the reason why that's where total cover can get really abused, especially in ranged combat. Defining what cover or obscurity a character needs to be hidden would be helpful. WotC are trying to correct this in 1D&D, but it likely needs to include facing situations. Boy. What was that terminology? That is almost completely flanking. That was it. We have to check whether or not we're missing with flanking. Because flanking was a huge aspect of 4th edition, where you could get bonuses if you're on either side of somebody. Now, if I remember correctly, there is no flanking in 5th edition because 5th edition is trying to discourage people from using a board, and you basically have to move a board. That also being said, it also makes sense that if 2 people are attacking the same target, that automatically should make it more difficult for that target to engage people. So you can create a situation where that if 2 or more people are attacking a target, you can automatically say that those characters are potentially flanking without having to have the rule in place where they have to be on opposite sides of the target, right? In definition, if one guy has got 2 people in front of him or 2 people on either side, he's still kind of boned in either way. And this, of course, assuming that we can easily have creatures that say like they cannot be flanked, for example, because they don't have a facing. But if we imply a facing and we create a situation where the GM can't make a kind of a call saying, I want to be on the opposite side of this guy. I want to move in such a point. So the issue is, of course, is that players will try to manipulate the system. But if we say that if 2 or more people are attacking the same target, they have an edge. And that creates our flanking rule. So that's something I want to volunteer, that if 2 or more are attacking the same target, all attackers have an edge. So let's see, flanking is advantage on attacks. This is an optional rule in the Dungeon Master's Guide. Yeah, and this comes to a point where now, and once again, it's an optional rule, and it's one of those situations where I want to make sure that people don't have to refer to another book. I want to kind of make sure these are all in here. So if we're going to have it be a rule, I either want it to be in or I want it to be out. I don't want it to be, because flanking is a big rule, to make it optional by saying, you know, I'm not going to employ flanking in this game, and that becomes a huge strategic advantage if you end up using it. So that's one thing to really consider, whether or not you want to put in flanking, and if you want it to have advantage. Or if it's optional, then we can easily redefine it without playing with it. We can either have edge or attackers have advantage. The issue, of course, is that if you make flanking a rule that all people can benefit, that advantage becomes too powerful. If you say 2 or more people attacking the same target, they have an edge. You get a +2 bonus. It's not as big as advantage. So that's one of the benefits if we include an actual defined flanking rule. like I said, I want lightly obscured, heavily obscured to be modified slightly. This is, like I said, total cover is always something that's going to be abused, but I don't know there's anything we can do about that. And we are throwing in, hopefully, flanking. I'm sure someone's going to say that that's broken, and if it is, let me know. Yeah, so so we're dealing with this. I don't believe I'm going to throw in flanking because that's going to be kind of part of this section here. When we deal with range, yeah, I think in this situation we're not going to have 14 different types. I know that. Oh, here I am, just starting to. I'm blanking now because I've been reading another book about how in the world. Because you have a range, and then you have beyond that range, it's disadvantage. I can't remember if there was a maximum range or whether or not. Yeah, smaller roll has no range. Larger number is long range. Your attack roll has a disadvantage when your target's beyond normal range, and you can't attack a target beyond long range. Yeah, and that's always something that's kind of been a bit of an issue with the tech rules in Ultramodern. Because it's never 100% accurate by just having 2 increments. You either are really good or you suck. And it's one of those situations, again, when I was putting in sniper weapons, I gave sniper weapons a ridiculously shortened range in comparison because I didn't think players would be in situations where they're taking sniper attacks from 1,000 feet. But technically, you can be a sniper and make attacks from 3 or 4 kilometers away. But I don't put in, because technically a bullet has a much longer range than any of the ranges that are ever placed in, right? Basically, the range rules as defined only really work well with bows, because bows generally do have a maximum range. A gun can travel a lot further than a bow. And that's been the biggest issue. And I want this rule to not be rooted in only doing fantasy. Now, when I did sci-fi rules, I didn't break the trend. And so I did arbitrarily drop the ranges of all the weapons. And I said that it's not that the range is... It's not the weapon just hits that 400 foot and just drops. It becomes a situation where the weapon can no longer reliably hit a target. So you can't attack anyone beyond that because you can't see them. But that also being said, we added rules for snipers. I agree that 2 or more people attacking the same person is a huge benefit. I found during my martial arts training that we didn't need to be on either side of a single target. So, okay, yeah, that's a great point. So we're kind of playing on the idea of adding flanking as a new rule, but it's not advantage. It's just an edge, and it's 2 or more, and you don't get any more advantage if 3 people are attacking the same target. I kind of like this idea because it does create a situation where players might want to coordinate themselves. They try to coordinate, and some players are just like, I attack the weakest one. By the way, am I the only person that really friggin' hates when players say that? I attack the weakest one. Like, you're in combat, they're all looking like crap. You have no idea. But the number of times players say, I attack the one with the fewest hit points. I'm like, you don't know that. I would not bother with the old flanking rules from the Dungeon Master's Guide 5. Yeah, I think that's right going forward. So unless there's any confusion here, we're gonna keep that rule in, keep these rules in, and then range. We can have. I mean, I can see. There is one thing we can use for advantage. So you have normal range, which is no modifier. You have, what do they call it? Long range or extreme range? I can't remember. Long range. Is it only 2 melee attacks or any attack range? You may explain what you're talking about, Endless Nights. Is it only 2 melee attacks or... Oh, okay. You mean flanking. The answer is, I think would have to be melee. Thank you. Okay. 2 or more attacking the same target. Yeah, because it would have to be melee, because it's one of those situations... Oh, actually, you might have a point. It might be anybody, just because if someone's concentrating on a melee person, then they're not paying attention trying to dodge the gunfire. That also being said, 2 people that are shooting at the same target, I don't know whether or not they're giving each other that type of advantage. So that's something to talk about, whether or not we want to be able to mix melee and ranged with flanking, or whether or not it's just going to be melee. Yeah, I know. So that's the question, whether or not, I wish this thing didn't have like a 20-second delay, whether or not we are going to allow range in flanking. Going back to here, normal is no modifier. I don't need to have that in all caps. And then long range is going to be, of course, disadvantage. But we can also have extreme range. And extreme range, we can simply say it's double disadvantage because we've already defined that we can have double disadvantage. And then long range and extreme range can be, extreme range is kind of like the limit. It's between long range and this. And extreme range is like you can even say extreme range. You can even call it like the max range, maximum range, max range, because that is the outer limit of how far this thing goes out. And if it's, and because I don't want to include all three ranges, yeah, I just like players saying they attack the weakest or creature with the fewest hit points. I'm going to assume that everybody does that because I have never had a group that didn't. Every person, they'll start by attacking this one, and then I'll attack the one that Jeremy's attacking. I don't know why I said the word Jeremy. I don't know any friends named Jeremy. But then there's a point that's like, okay, so you killed that one. Okay, what's the weakest one? And I'm like which one has the most injuries? I'm like, make a perception check. I don't make a perception check. I kind of just acquiesce. I said, fine, go for this one, because at the end of the day, players want to be awesome. So, and max range is not indicated. So these are indicated, right? Max range is not indicated. And that's because max range would be like times 4 long range. So that's my other pitch for range. We're still going to have normal and long for most people, but we'll give people the advantage or the possibility of attacking beyond that. We can also put rules of the fact that bows, can't fire a max range, or maybe we don't care and just say, look, bows are just, let them have it, because what are the chances of someone actually attacking with a bow at that range anyway? This is basically for sniper weapons. And a sniper scope can, because sniper scope, for example, if you use a sniper scope, it costs movement to use a sniper scope, and you nullify that disadvantage in that range. But what you do is you reduce it by 1. So that long range no longer has disadvantage, and then max range gets reduced to disadvantage. And that's one of the things we can do when we're dealing with stuff with tech or tech stuff, is playing around with those rules. So to summary, we've kind of played, we haven't changed much here. Since we haven't had much blowback on this one, I think we're going to definitely go with the more loosey rules of action movement bonus free. The only thing, we're removing the word action and just calling it action movement bonus free, and then but reaction we're going to further define as a reflex or an interrupt. And we're not changing cover or concealment. That's not changing, except we are adding a rule for flanking. And unless anyone has any objections, we're adding a max range rule for ranged weapons. So there's that. And I know we're going to have to talk about this. One of the hardest rules to properly define. So in opportunity attacks, basically you have reach. To make an opportunity attack, you use your reaction to make 1 melee attack against a provoking creature. The attack interrupts... See, interesting how they specifically say your attack interrupts provoking the creature's movement occurring right before the creature leaves your reach. So the fact that they are saying reaction, but they say this is interrupt, but they didn't define interrupt. So they are using the terminology. They're allowing a reaction to interrupt, but they don't specifically say that unless they say this interrupts that action. If you take the disengage action, you don't provoke an opportunity attack. And I also find it interesting that, once again, like before, you only get to do 1. You can only do 1 unless you have a special ability, which we're going to be talking about once we get into classes. I'm going to probably suggest, once we get into classes, I'm going to make the very unpopular suggestion of putting roles back in. You'll love me for that one. So opportunity attacks, yeah, 5-foot reach, blah, blah, blah. I don't think that's actually going to change. We're probably going to keep those the way they are. And 2-weapon fighting. Oh, bugger hell. So that one just uses light weapons. A bonus action to attack with a different light melee weapon that you're holding in your other hand. I guess I can stay. I know most of the time that's how they define it. You only do one action, and then you get your bonus action to do another attack. So shoving a creature, this is when we get into those contested rolls. And they give you a variety of strength, I guess dexterity or what have you. We get cover, and then we have damage. So this is the other big question we're going to be talking about today. And that is damage and healing. We'll talk about damage types in a second. Now, one of the biggest things here is the fact there are no negative hit points in 5e. You drop to 0, and then you just drop. Like, you never have negative hit points. And the idea with 4th edition and maybe some other... I despise 2-weapon fighting. Okay. I love 2-weapon fighting in an idea. I know if you are experienced in combat in any way, there's very few times where you actually use your other weapon for doing 2 attacks. And this is something where we could play with 2-weapon fighting to make it, honestly, more realistic. But for those people who follow real combat, in situations where somebody is using 2 swords, generally it's one larger sword and then one light sword, and then the light weapon is a deflection. You're never attacking with 2 weapons at once. You're always just parrying with the other weapon. And someone's going to say, no, these people here, they do it this way. And I'm like, yeah, but generally when you see in combat, one person, like when they're responding, they're using that system to create. Now, we could play with the idea, and this is one of those situations where you can use your reaction to an attack to interrupt, to use your secondary weapon to parry, right? And that could be something where 2-weapon fighting, a reaction to parry. Now, someone's going to say there's already parry rules for our class. We'll get into that. But the reaction, parry. But we can also play with this. For example, if you use a reaction to parry, you cannot use the bonus action on your next turn. I just want shields to be an interesting choice. Yeah, I mean, so many people are using the 2-weapon fighting because you get that additional attack. And they consider that a balance from using the shield. And I think one of the situations is whether or not, and we'll get into equipment, whether or not we can have fun with shield. Like, shields are a traditional +2 AC, but maybe there's something else a shield can do. One of the things they can do, for example, is that the shield, being a +2 AC, operates exactly like mobile cover, so that even though it doesn't affect you, somebody behind you can benefit from it. That's something to consider. Take that into thinking about whether or not shield and then offers half cover to other people. And that creates a very interesting strategic decision, especially if the shield person, because let's be honest, this is friggin' true. I mean, this creates a situation where we can actually develop combat tactics. And someone's going to say this already applies. If this already applies, let me know. But if you have, if you say, I'm going to use a shield, and then Frank here, he has a spear, and as long as he's behind me, he can attack through my spot, and he benefits from my half cover. Right? Now, someone's going to say this has been done. Of course, the answer is I did it in Amethyst. Amethyst, the Genoan shield wall. The shield wall is a type of paragon, or sorry, a subclass for fighter. And you got these insanely good abilities by using a shield. Most people know that, yeah, there's shield bash, but it's interesting that you can't, I mean, there's also a thing where maybe, and this is where things get funny. Shield can nullify flanking. Possible. Ooh, that's a good idea. Endless Night. That's a good idea. Nullify flanking. That's a really good idea. I don't know if we should have both of these. I think these, like +2 AC and you nullify flanking. To weapon fighting, you can use your bonus action, but you cannot use the it depends. It's one of those situations where, do we use it before? Obviously, use it after. So you use your reaction. You can't use that bonus action for that second attack. But you get that benefit. The other thing we can do, if we want, is that we can have Shield Bash as a bonus action. That creates a situation. Yeah, two-weapon fighting was normally performed rapier and dagger. Obviously, not two rapiers. Yeah, I said that earlier. So that's you agreeing with me because you're saying that was correct. Yeah, most people you had a larger weapon and a shorter weapon, and that's kind of how two-weapon fighting worked. Of course, we've now seen situations where it's not. I've seen, was it two short swords like a gladius, for example? You would have someone would have two gladiuses. I'm not sure that's the actual plural. I can't remember. And so we've seen that so often. But and the unfortunate thing is that unless someone's ambidextrous, there isn't really a benefit for having two weapons of the same size. It's probably going to be more of a hindrance than anything else. So these are the two. This idea, I want people to really consider this. Whether or not, like right now, we're creating a situation as this. We can remove the shield bash bonus action, but I think that should be something. If we're going to give people two-weapon fighting with a sword, then you can have a shield bash. That being said, a shield bash will generally a shield bash can't be enchanted. A shield bash is going to do less damage than a potential weapon. The funny thing is that a shield bash would potentially still allow you to use your AC. So we're in this situation. We're creating a situation where the shield is phenomenally better than a two-blade weapon, because we're basically giving you +2 AC, half cover, nullify flanking, and you can use your shield bash as a bonus action. That creates crazy benefits with someone who uses a shield. That being said, maybe we just reserve that as a class action and not give it to everybody, and just have it being +2 half cover other people, nullify flanking. This one you can gain the parry, and that kind of creates a balance between two-weapon fighting and shield and weapon fighting. So if you're using two weapons, you can attack with a bonus action, or you can use parry, but if you use the parry, you can't use the action. And the shield gives you +2 to AC, and nullifies flanking and provides half cover to people behind you. So those are really good benefits. Someone might say the two-weapon fighting is weaker now, but maybe we'll kind of return to it. So, and then maybe I'm going to reserve this class. So maybe a fighter, we can have some fun and have and play around with that. So we're going to move that over to classes for now. So, all right. So I think that is. So we'll wait for anyone who has any comments regarding these things. Again, we're adding a benefit with two-weapon fighting where you can parry, but if you do parry, you can't use the attack on the next bonus action. Shield offers +2 as normal, but it also says it nullifies the flanking rule we just added, and you have half cover for people behind you. So this one's more offensive. This one is absolutely certainly defensive. And so this is a very interesting dynamic, because we create a situation where you're defining how your character is going to be acting in combat, if you're going to be frontal assault or you're going to be defensive. And once we get to things like roles, where somebody who is so specializing in aggravation, which is something that was a rule from 4th edition, giving some extra shield options to a fighter class or subclass as a guardian who specializes around using large tower shields or shields in general. We can like I said, I can bring my shield. Like I said, chances are, if this ever becomes official, I'm gonna bastardize everything that's rule related from Amethyst and Ultramodern, and create just a gigantic book with everything in it. And obviously, people know I'm making new fantasy classes for Amethyst Revelations. And we'll talk about that because this may end up something I may learn from it and play with it in Revelations. But in Revelations, instead of offering like 8 classes, I'm only offering 4. So the Ranger type class is a Ranger Rogue. There is an Assassin that has some roguish stuff, but is a lot more bardish. So the Rogue is a Rogue and Bard. The Ranger is a Ranger Rogue, and then the Fighter is a Fighter Barbarian, and then we have the Spellcaster, which so we kind of trim it down, but then we give these crap tons of additional benefits, like a lot of different branches, and then of course because the subclasses are all universal, we give people a lot more freedom. But someone's I want to play a Bard. I go, yeah, but we talked about it in our first week session, where we said we were going to trim down spellcasters, so there's only one spellcaster with multiple branches. And this is also connected to what we were talking about removing gods out of the story so that clerics aren't part of the setting, aren't part of the base mechanical rules. So going back to damage and healing, we're looking at whether or not we want to put in negative hit points. The other issue with 2-weapon fighting is that the secondary attack does include the ability modifier in 5e. Makes no sense other than a balance issue. The other issue is that the secondary attack... Was it? I thought... Am I confusing it with another system? Because I thought... Yeah, you don't add your modifier. So I'm not sure whether or not you typed that right. Because 2-weapon fighting... You don't add your ability modifier to the damage of the bonus attack unless that modifier is a negative. So what you're implying is to remove that. I don't have an issue removing it. Because once again, if it's a balance issue, and this is one thing I've said whenever, and this is, I'm sure we're going to have a talk about this at some point, how to RPG, but D&D is not balanced. D&D has never been 100% balanced. We know that classes, they develop at different rates, and there's certain points when certain classes are way more powerful than others, and there's certain situations where a single level jumps you a lot more than previous. So there's always this, it's not like a board game where you have to be 100% balanced every step of the way. And when you get down to it, the secondary attack, adding +2 to 3+3 damage, and of course, it's a light weapon, so it's already doing less damage. It creates a situation where a lot of times that 2-weapon attack is kind of an afterthought because it doesn't do very much. But so that's going to be a question whether or not we want to continue, because right now by default there is no modifier. So what we're talking about whether or not we want to add it or keep it out. Anyway, so negative hit points. Now, if we were going to, and I'm going to do it right now, tap into my original, where is it? Ugly as sin and a very worn. Don't add your ability modifier to secondary tap. A typo. Okay, yeah. But so you're saying that that's, so yeah. So you're saying it does not include and makes no sense. So at this point, the question is, are you implying that we put it back in? So we know, for example, that, by the way, if you ever see my player's handbook, I can't really quite show it here if this is actually going to be visible. But you notice I've actually added in the massive errata. I've taped them all into the book. Shows you how much use I got out of this thing. So we know, by the way, we're probably going to talk about, yeah, you can't see it, unfortunately. Darn. Whether or not, because I know 4th edition did have negative hit points, and you died if you were reduced to your hit points expressed as a negative, or it was your ability, like your con score was your negative. I'm trying to remember how that was. You're still making death saving throws. And then, so death saving throws don't change. No, I'm not gonna. I had an idea. I didn't. I had an idea. I'm not gonna do it. As soon as you have current hit points of more than one, you can take an action to stand back up. I think we don't need negative hit points. I think we can go without it. I think both attacks damage formulas should be the same for two-weapon fighting. Okay. So, modifier to both attacks. By the way, one thing we'll talk about once we get to other things, we also, when it comes to shields, we have something called max mod. It's no longer your dex modifier to your AC. It's a max mod. So it's basically your maximum modifier. So it's whatever your highest attribute modifier is. So this kind of encourages people to kind of play around with light armor more if they wish. And it kind of works out for them. But we'll get into that later. I'm not sure why I put that there. But we'll not sure where that'll go. Probably in the equipment section where it should be. So shield, damage, healing, negative hit points. I think we're not going to do that. But here's the question, folks. Yeah, when 4E you died once you got to half your hit points of negative. Now that being said, having that and having death saving throws feels like, because that's what 4th edition had. 4th edition had negatives and it had death and dying saving throws. Now, I dislike death saving throws because it is a 50-50 chance that almost nobody can modify. I played around with a few classes like that had that ability where they automatically save their first death saving throw. So I have played with that, but I will state unequivocally that the death saving throw being a flat 50-50 that you couldn't modify, why can't you modify it? Why can't you add your con bonus to it? That's the question I'm asking. If we're going to put in death saves, why not add con mod? And the other question is, why have death saves at all? Because at the end of the day, death saves adds urgency. You can create a situation, and hear me out here before I read the comment there, because I know someone's going to say it's a bad idea. That if you add it, and you can simply say, you get, so it's like it's half your hit point value as a negative. You could also change it and say it's the negative value of your con score, playing with con score again, and then create a situation where on your turn you suffer an X amount of damage, right? Which means if you're not healed, you're going to continually die. And I know that healing creates a situation like when you're at 0 hit points. Yeah, so 4th edition was a bit more punishing. The fact that you would make changes, and if you fail 3 times, you die. But if you succeeded 3 times, you succeeded. And 4th edition didn't have the succeed. You were basically always dying unless someone healed you. Unless you rolled a natural 20, which means you got to spend a healing surge, and you're at 0 hit points, you can jump up and start the battle again. I would not include negative hit points. It's a pain to track, but I would prefer death saving throws not be included or be an optional variant rule. I'm trying against variant rules, so let's play with it again. I'm up to the point of trying to remove death saves completely out of this rule set. And I don't think it's going to really break the game. Because at the end of the day, this is one of the things I want to be very specific about. I don't want this situation where characters are dropping like flies. I don't want to have a situation where you need to have your cleric to constantly resurrect you because characters are always dying. And players don't want their characters to die, and GMs don't want their characters to die or mean. So this is the one thing I want people to consider. Do we remove the death saves? But we have to have a situation where somebody, can recover on their own or not, whether or not we use negative hit points or not. So this is the big question. I want to make sure that this is highlighted so we can think about this in case we run out of time, because I don't know if I want to go for the full 2 hours today. There was one other thing we wanted to talk about. And I'm going to write it here so that you know that I want to talk about it before this stream is out. And that is bloodied. So now, in case you're wondering, I put in bloodied in Ultramax, but bloodied actually has 4 categories in Ultramax, but Ultramax is meant to be punishing. So this is one of those situations. If we don't use negative hit points, I mean, what's the difference? Like, once you hit 0 hit points, what's stopping you from just continually to track your hit points past that? I like the idea that reaching 0 hit points means you are dead unconscious, depending on the lethality people want. Yeah, and I don't want to give people a lethal rating. I think, once again, if we do all have optional rules, that'll be the Ultramax set, where we give people the option of being a lot more punishing. But it's one of those situations where, should we have a situation where you are surviving for a lot longer than just 3 rounds before somebody has to heal you? Potentially, because you could potentially fail 3 times. Or we put a situation where you can recover yourself. And why is it a 50-50 chance that everyone has an equal odds in doing? Should somebody have a better chance doing it than others? Could somebody with a 20 constitution just have a better chance of making it through? There is one... No, I wouldn't want to do that. I was going to say, like, you can simply say, make a fort save instead of a death save. That could actually do it, folks. Think about that. Replacing the death save with a fort save, because that does involve using something you're good at, and you get to use your strength or your constitution. So maybe we use fort save. And I know this is me just throwing ideas out, and maybe it's not just 3 failures, but failures equal to your con mod, for example. So that if you have a high con, the chances of you croaking is pretty slim. So that's and so in this situation, somebody with a high fort, they're really hard to kill. I know that, once again, if we don't do negative hit points, so we don't have anything that involves like somebody beating the crap out of somebody who's already fallen, which has always been mean as hell. So I know that instant death in 5e, when damage reduces your 0 hit points and there is damage remaining, you die if the remaining damage equal or exceeds your hit point maximum. But that's crazy. How many people get instant death from that much damage? Yeah, first level, sure. But how many situations, if you're 20th level or 15th level, can you get hit with such an attack that it loses you lose all your hit points? And the funny thing is that technically, when you talk about that, instant death implies negative hit points. So falling unconscious to 0, that's not going to change. You're making, and then we have the saving throws, stabilization. We can still say, even though that the 3 successes is still what you need to be stabilized. I was mentioning in my autism video about how bad my eye-hand coordination is. Fate just stated that you were knocked out of the fight and had penalties once you recovered after the battle. I'm not... Okay, so from a fantasy having fun group, I don't like the idea of knocking someone out of that combat. It's the idea of skip a turn. We don't want people to be out of combat that long. This is the one thing where yeah, instant death only incurred at low level. Exactly, that's the only situation it comes in. So having instant death there doesn't make sense. So if we don't have negative, so we're kind of moving negative hit points out. So that's moving that side. We can create a situation where we like, it's one of those situations. Do we even bother having instant death? Is it something that we need to have? Is it something that has to happen? For those people who remember, there was an ejection rule in Mechton. The chances of you ejecting out of your mech was extremely high. Extremely high. So the chance of you dying in your mech was pretty slim. But if you rolled especially badly, there was a range of how much time you could take before your inevitable death. So so if you rolled really, really badly, it was you going like that, and that's it. You were dead, and there was no recovery. But if you rolled just below that threshold, you got to make an eloquent, heroic speech for like 25, 30 seconds before you die. And I always enjoyed that. I'm not saying I'm putting that in here. I'm not going to put that in here. I don't think that's we don't want to turn death into a game mechanic in that way. And I'll talk about why. Because when I was writing the original D20 Amethyst, somebody wanted to create a prestige class for a paladin, and the rules for how you ran your character when you were no longer a paladin, because the old 3.5, you could stop being a paladin and you would lose all your class abilities. If you did something that would anger your god, you would lose all your abilities. And so this class literally said that most likely that you were going to lose all your class abilities at some point. And so this class had a whole page of checks and balances for how you would recover your faith and get your abilities back. And the player was so emphatic that this be included. And I said, nobody wants to ever lose their class abilities unless they're a hardcore role player. And if they are a hardcore role player, they don't need mechanics to tell them how to play their game. So why are we including mechanic for something that will likely never happen? And if it does, it'll happen by someone who doesn't need rules to tell them how to do it anyway. And they were so passionate about pushing this onto the project. When I said that it would not work, and I don't want it, and I was basically pulling rank, they and like one other person quit the project. And that's the reason why I don't have any co-writers on any Amethyst book since 3.5. Because there has to be a situation where there has to be someone puts their foot down and people don't take it personally. I would ditch instant death rules from 5e, the only punish being low level and hoping that dice gods aren't angry. You're 100% right. Let's remove instant death out of the equation completely. So yeah, that's it. And also being said, the fact that in 5th edition, just like 4th edition, there were no instant death in spells anyway, so there was nothing. Like, disintegrate was the only thing. Like, you took a crap ton of damage, and then if you got reduced to 0 hit points, you got disintegrated. And then stabilization is not going to change. It's a medicine check to stabilize, right? So we're not going to put in negative hit points. So the question is, are we going to do bloodied? I think, because we're not, just before we get onto it, we're going to do hit dice. We are not doing healing surges. Hit dice just is so much easier. It's so much easier than having an entire separate mechanic. But the question is whether or not we're going to include bloodied. And this will be the last question for the day. Because that basically handles, we've basically gone through all of combat in a very speedy fashion. I didn't think we'd be able to go through all of combat. And I know for those people who are curious, bloodied, in case people can't hear me, sorry, bloodied is when you hit half hit points. When you go below half hit points, you are bloodied. And it did one dominant thing, and that was if a creature was bloodied, you got to do things to them if they were bloodied. But certain creatures activate certain abilities once they are bloodied. And this was a way of creating like second phases of monsters. Like, for example, if you had a recharge ability, the moment that creature was bloodied, it reset automatically. Which I friggin' love. I'm not going to lie. I friggin' love the bloodied condition. For those people who are curious, the actual definition of being bloodied: you're bloodied when your current hit points drop to your bloodied value or lower. Your bloodied value is 1/2 your maximum hit points. Certain powers and effects work only against a bloodied enemy or work better. That also being said, like I said, it was also a mechanical way for GMs to say, okay, the creature is definitely hurt. It's definitely showing the injuries. And then players be like, oh, it's bloodied. And it's that one situation, How to RPG, where a player's like, Is there, whereas like which one's the most heavily damaged? Like you don't know, but you can make that polarization where this one looks more damaged than this one because this one's bloodied and this one isn't. And that creates a defined rule that a GM could use without having to kind of bend to what a player is like, well, this one has one less hit point, so I want to attack this guy, and gets rid of that kind of ideology. And by putting Bloody back in, we get to play with a lot of cool mechanics, and it has a ton of fun. So I want to throw that question, last question out. Do we include Bloodied? Obviously, I'm for it. I really like putting the idea of a Bloodied value. And once again, if you're doing a canonical 5e game, you just ignore it, and you ignore any of the effects. I was not a fan of Bloodied, but we have had this discussion. Do what you want here. Chris is like, well, do what you want. Fine, you do what you want. I don't want to talk to you anymore. Okay, so I'm definitely going to hold this up for other people. If anyone else is watching that can comment, I'm all for Bloodied as a condition. Great for conditional effects and attacks for both players and monsters. Okay, okay. So 2 votes yes, 1 vote no. Like I said, it's also something like Bloodied. We don't have to go kind of crazy. We can have it just be monsters, and we can throw in a couple random abilities where it's not game breaking. The idea that if a GM goes, we're going to use this rule set, but we're going to go just 100% 5e official, right? Or if you bring monsters into this setting, it's the monster isn't broken because it doesn't have, and of course, creating a bloodied value to a monster is easy. You just write what half its hit points are. So this is another huge, I don't want to say huge change, but the change that's going to be in the conversion list. And we know about temporary hit points is not going to change, and hit dice aren't going to change. Oh, damn, I forgot about one more thing. Are we defining encounters / battles? And I want to talk about short and long rests. And we might have to do that next time, because I don't know. It's not something that every monster needs, just some of them to keep the players on edge. I think every boss fight, anything that's considered a boss. Now, in 4th edition, you did actually have bosses. They were called solos. There were brutes, but brutes, even though they had a ton more hit points, could be part of an encounter. But a solo was specifically 4 levels higher than your group because it was meant to be a boss fight. It was a solo. So, but we can imply that certain things like dragons, demons, anything like that, they'll have bloodied values and bloodied triggers. Every monster can have a bloodied value, but then only a few situations that may trigger. Now the advantage, this is one of those, this comes with a big question. And this is something for GMs. Do you allow a short rest after every battle? A lot of players that I've talked to kind of make this assumption that once the battle is over, they're taking a short rest, right? And there was some people implying that you always take a short rest in 5e. Now, the issue is that I think the confusion was a lot of people thought that a short rest was 5 minutes. There used to be this definition about 5 minutes was being a short rest, and of course that's not the case. A short rest, by the way, is an hour. So the questions, of course, now is, obviously I'm pretty sure we're not going to do healing surge. We're going to do hit dice. We're going to put bloodied in. And the questions here is, first of all, I think there's been nobody objecting to this. So the idea of removing instant death and the number of failures equals your con mod, and you make a fort save, which makes it really easy for characters to live. And that creates a big situation where it reduces our need of having clerics. The other situation is encounters and battles, short and long rests. So I think 4E had the 5-minute rests before battles, and I think 5E pushed it to an hour to discourage people from taking short rests. Now let's see if I can find whether or not there were rests. Because for the life of me, I can't remember if they were rests. because you got to spend healing surges when you were resting. But I can't remember about the rules about out of combat. Because in 4E, yeah, so thank you, Endless Nights. But you get nailed it right there. So 4E was 5 minutes, so you had it 95% of the time. Short rest in 5E is an hour. I'm more or less for rules that are consistent, so it's easy to play for new people. What's the duration of short rest? Okay, so short rests in 5E is an hour, and then long rests are 8 hours. Yeah, 4E, by the way, for those people who are curious, 4E also had something called Second Wind, for those people who are curious. Second Wind was a type of action that had specific benefits, but it allowed you to basically spend healing surges, I think. Yeah, spend a healing surge, regain hit points, plus 2 defenses until the start of the next turn, and you can do that once per encounter. So that, I'm not against Second Wind. So that's the question, whether or not we want to put Second Wind. I'm sure people will kind of say we don't need it, and you're probably right. Question is here now is whether or not it was increased to 1 hour in 5E. So depending on the pressure of time, people tend to just skip over them from time. That's correct, but you'd be surprised the number of players I know that kind of make the assumption. So at this point, so if we keep the short rests with the way they are, so it's 1 hour and 8, so we don't really change the resting situation. The question is whether or not we want to define encounters or battles. Now, the reason why this was important was that in 3.5 and 3 variations, you had a certain number of uses a day, and then you might have a once per day ability. And 4E did away from that completely and just gave you encounter powers you can use once per battle, and then a daily power you could use once a day. And that was the big difference between. Now, I played with that rules in 4E. Second Wind is now 5E's feature. Oh yeah, you're right. I completely forgot about that. That being said, it's funny that it's only given to fighters. Once again, it's one of those situations where it was something that everyone could get, and now we're just giving it to one person. I'm not gonna lie, I don't mind giving it to everybody again, but that's something that I think people can talk about. The other thing here is, for those people who are just joining us here, we're talking about whether or not we want to define encounters / battles. We'll call it a battle, only because these are going to be related to combat abilities. Defining encounter and battle is a good idea. Yeah, there is a situation, and for people who know, like, the 4E was kind of annoying. You'd be role-playing and saying, okay, the encounter begins, you set up the map, you play for a half an hour on the map, and then you pull off the map to go back and go, the encounter is now over. Generally, it's basically when initiative begins, or when initiative or surprise, right? And then it ends. Apparently I can't spell today, but what else is new? And then it ends when the GM says so. And I think that's critically important. I'm pretty sure that's actually in the 4E game anyway, that it's when the GM says so. That being said, a GM can be very, very cruel, but generally if it's 5 minutes between attacks, or if characters roll for initiative again. Now, that being said, I don't know if I want to throw in encounter powers, but the idea of just defining what a battle is might give us a variety so that we could create, if we wanted, a situation where you can do this only once per battle. Like, for example, like if we gave Second Wind and we said once per encounter battle, you get to do this, and then you've given us the advantage of saying once per encounter. Which now you've made me look up fighter again, because I've been reading 3 different rule systems so much I always forget. And wait a second, why doesn't Barbarian have it? No, but that's another conversation. I'm not going to talk about that. I want to read that entry for fighter very, very quickly. I just want to because something's telling me and then 2 to 3 short rests to the long rest. I think that's the breakdown. So this is one of those situations. I mean, I can see defining the encounter and battle system just for definition. That being said, we may limit how many times we have things that are encounter based, and if we're continuing the short rest, that gives us a situation where players can reset certain things between battles. So, because this is something that's very common, where players, they're starting their day and they don't use any of their special abilities because they're banking them so that they can use them in what they believe to be the big battle at some point. And so there have been situations where a player would go through his whole day and like, well, I never got to use any of this because I was expecting a big battle. And that was the advantage of encounter abilities, because you got to use it every single time. So you're like, I'm going to use this ability on this battle. And that was the one thing I like about encounters, is that encounter ability allows you to do something cool every battle. You didn't have to bank it to the next one. So we're going to leave it for that. So those are the questions for now. I want people to comment in the chat below once this becomes an official video. We're not going to make any conversations about this, but anything you want to add about whether or not we want to add second wind, whether or not we really want to put in the idea of encounter abilities. The daily encounter is already in there, so we're not going to worry about that. I think we're going to go this route for hit points. And basically, the next time we do this, we are going to just go over what we talked about previously. I'm not going to go over the whole thing again, because just download the file below, folks. And then, like I said, I think after we get through that, I think that's it. I'm going to go through my Pathfinder book and see if there's anything else we're missing. Oh, yeah, no, we're going to do conditions next time, too. Because I want more conditions in 5e, but not as many as Pathfinder. But yeah, so we're getting votes for the idea of battle abilities. We may call them, like I said, once during a battle, and the idea in 4e, I had to define a non-combat encounter because I was creating non-combat classes and abilities that didn't do direct damage. This was the biggest problem with people who had 4e. 4e was a combat game. It didn't give you a lot of opportunities for out-of-combat role-playing. And I decided to do that with creating non-combat powers. And the idea that an encounter would begin, but not necessarily be a battle encounter. This time, we don't have to do that. We can define a battle as an actual battle. And then, so if you have abilities that are not combat-based, they wouldn't be a resettable battle ability. You could have them as role-playing. Because people are much more... please define different encounters. Okay, so yeah, if we go this route, we would have a battle, right? But what's the... I mean, I don't like calling it like a non-combat encounter. It's... I mean, I could just call it an encounter and say an encounter is a non-battle, right? And then we can do it that way. I mean, I can be a grammar asshole and just say it's an assignation. But no, we can define it, but I don't know whether or not we want to put rules in that. It may be a situation where people get confused. But I have no problem at defining what a battle is or what an encounter is, but I don't know whether or not I want to put non-battle resettable encounter abilities. An exploration encounter. Yeah, but I think just calling it battle and encounter and knowing that encounter is a non-action battle. A social encounter. Those are all... I don't know if I really want to get that specific of breaking encounters into social encounters and exploration encounters. It creates a situation where we're putting a lot of additional rules that I don't think we need. I don't mind the idea of having battle or non-battle and calling non-battles encounters. But I'm also of opinion the fact that there's only two states. You're either fighting or you're not fighting. And so the idea of defining a non-combat encounter might be superfluous. Because like you're either fighting or we're not. And this is a play off of the whole barbarian flowchart. If you remember the barbarian flowchart, it was all, am I in a fight? Yes, rage. If I'm not, wait until... It was a flowchart that either ended to you to not doing anything or you raging. It's a great little flowchart. It's probably 20 years old by this point. So conditions we'll do next time. These will be the questions. Hopefully we'll get resolved. If no one makes any comments, I'll kind of make a call on it for best. And if we have time, we'll hopefully go into races next time, or species, sorry. Because I don't think we're messing around with these. These have all been defined. I wanted to go through these today, and we have. So yeah, if we get through all of this, we'll have all of combat done, and then we'll move into species. Oh, what a shock. I'm 2 hours again. I was trying to get this small, but you get into these patterns. We didn't have as many people. We've had, I think that the highest number of people we had on these things was 12. Also, in your comments, if you want to join these things and you don't like the timetable, pick where you want this to be. Like if you have, like, I'd love to join a live stream, but I'm only available in these days. I have no problem changing these days because I'm a full-time writer, so I could change these any other time. I like doing in the afternoon because it's the largest number of people across the world, right? If you're in the UK, if you're even in China and a few other places, you know, this is I get Europe and I get the US, and that's a pretty big one for me. But anyways, folks, that'll be it for today. Thank you so much. 2 hours is good. Yeah, it's like, yeah, but I got shit to do. Actually, not today. The funny thing is now I have a lot of videos I do. I do my Tuesday podcast with Paco, the Paco podcast at GMS Magazine. I should have been sleeping, but I have no time. Yeah, well, don't get me started. I got a long story about why I only got about 3.5, 4 hours sleep last night. That's the other reason about doing this in the morning is if I do it at 4 o'clock, I'm going to gas out. But I won't get into that now. We're at a 2 hour point. I'm going to, over the next few days, write out this section, and we'll leave this section here for next time. But please make comments below what your thoughts on whether or not we should define battles and encounters, uses per day, and whether or not we should add second wind as something everyone can get. And if you have any comments on conditions, also post that. But that'll be it for today, folks. Thank you for listening and watching. And like and subscribe. And please, yeah, like the video, subscribe. I've gotten about 40 or 50 subscribers since the whole OGL fiasco, and I've been putting a lot of videos because I've been commenting and then posting retractions because I was semi-supportive of 1.2. Then I decided to not be supportive of 1.2, but that's more about a community thing. Not that I've been pressured. It's more about some, like, virtual tabletops. I know a few publishers are being directly affected by the 1.2 revision. So even though it doesn't affect me, it doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't affect other people. So I'm basically going against the 1.2 for solidarity's sakes. But yeah, folks, that's it for me, and I will catch you on the flip side. And talk to you later.